What is up, everybody? We are so excited to be back for the new episode, and today we have an amazing guest. She is incredible. She is wonderful. She loves Jesus fully, and I just absolutely adore her, and she just brings so much joy into people's lives. And yeah, I'm going to introduce you to my really good friend, Abi Friedemann.
What's up, bro? That's Abi? My wife. He's getting very, very complimentary there of my wife. I'm starting to feel a little bit like I don't know what's happening right now.
I'm just honoring her.
Hey guys, what's up? Jared
what's up,
is probably one of the most encouraging people I know. Hey Jay, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Good.
So good to have you on an episode finally.
I know. I feel like, what is my life? I get to be on the Connect podcast.
Whoa.
It's amazing.
Whoa. Hello, Ben.
What's up?
How you doing, bro?
I feel like I've been hit by a truck, bro.
Really?
My body is broken.
It's been a week.
In 3 different ways.
What did you do?
Well, CrossFit yesterday didn't help, I must admit. We did some serious weights at CrossFit for the first time in a long time.
What was the one that made you feel most uncomfortable?
Squat lunge complex with a bar.
Cheapers. There must have been some intense music thing going on there.
I don't even want to know what that is.
I don't even know if the music was there, bro. I was in too much pain to hear anything.
That is, yeah, I can imagine. I've been with you to a couple of sessions. It's quite rough out there.
It's real. It's real. So this week, we're still in our Kingdom series, but we're speaking about worship.
Sure.
So what I want to know is, why did worship become a subject we decided to discuss under Kingdom?
Sure. I think worship is a really powerful way we connect with God. And it's just the way we adore Him and we show Him what we're grateful for in our lives. And it's a moment just to honor Him. And so, yeah, that feels a little bit like Kingdom. So I think it's really cool to have that in the series as well.
I also remember in the Bible when Jesus instructs a king. It's not Jesus. It's before Jesus comes as Jesus. When God instructs a king to send his worshippers out ahead of the army. And basically what happens is the Philistine army has surrounded Israel. And the king wants to send out his warriors, but God says, no, send out the choir first. So they send out the choir, and the enemy army just turns and begins to attack one another. And so I think worship is the weapon of warfare the kingdom of God wages.
Yeah.
And worship destroys the strongholds of the enemy.
Yeah.
So really applicable when it comes. But talking about worship, we often mishear worship lyrics.
That is such facts.
Like I remember when I was little, worshipping in church, and there's a song that goes, I exalt thee, like saying I exalt God.
Yeah.
I always heard I am salty, like Salty the singing songbook. So I was super confused while we were all saying we were salty.
It's like an epic ballad for salty.
What's your most misheard worship lyric?
This one I really struggle with. I legit have nothing. Like I cannot.
Abby's just perfect. She always hears worship lyrics fine. I understand what that's like. What about you, Jared?
I mean, I'm deaf, so I mishear most things. But the lyric goes, your praise will ever be on my lips. And I heard it as, your cakes will ever be on my hips.
I mean,
I don't even know how you get there.
Bro. Blame Sean Connell and Brendan Samuels for that.
Probably.
So here's what we want to know from your groups. In group time, we want you to discuss what is the funniest misheard lyric from any song ever that you totally misheard. And you got a couple minutes to do that. 3, 2, 1, go. So we're talking about worship. We brought in a guest to talk about worship. The guest happens to be my wife.
Hey.
Sure.
Worship is the weapon of warfare that the kingdom of God wages. How are you a warrior of worship?
I love how Ben always approaches this like worship is the most like epic. To Ben, it's like this is warfare. Like to me, like worship is this beautiful, sweet moment with God. It's just so amazing how different people experience it so differently. Guys, I think worship is life. It's like asking the question of, what is breathing to you? It's like you can't function without it. And I think it's so vital that we make sure that, we are getting into God's presence and experiencing that space. But to me, worship it's a safe place. To me, worship is a fountain of refreshing. It's a place that I go to realign myself, realign my heart, and just refocus, forget about myself, and remember who God is. I think that to me is probably the one thing that I always go back to worship for.
Sure, so good.
That's really, really powerful. I think just to provide a little bit of a context to a passage I want to point, because I believe we always have to point back to the Bible, is in Romans 12 verse 1, it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship."
That was me on youth camp. When I was like 13 or 14, I put my body on the line full time. Because like you don't ever sleep on youth camp. So we'd worship until like 12 o'clock at night. And then we'd get a couple hours sleep, obviously, because everyone's chatting in the dorms. Then you get up at like 6 a.m. for devotions. And then the worship that you would go. There's pictures of me at youth camp, like sweating, massive bags under my eyes. But I was like, I will not stop jumping ever for Jesus. So I sacrificed my body.
Just like you did at CrossFit.
Just like I did at CrossFit. Both for Jesus, though. I've got to sustain this temple of the Holy Spirit by building it strong with CrossFit.
Come on.
Amazing.
So, Ab, we want to ask you the question of why is it important to worship?
Wow, the big one, the big question. This, I think, I touched on it a little bit earlier. I think as Christians, well, firstly, I just want to point to the fact that we were made by our Creator. And we were literally, our entire beings are made to reflect Him and to reflect back to Him. And so everything that is inside of us cries out for something greater than ourselves. And we have this hole inside of us that is literally void if not filled by Jesus Himself, if not filled by God. And so I think there's in our beings, we desire, we have this longing to come to Him and to be filled by Him. So I think firstly, we respond naturally. That's just how we are. And so there's this desire in us that we can't function without worship.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is super, super powerful. But on top of that, I think, when you talk about body, soul, mind, spirit, emotional wholeness, connectedness, I think all of that points back to worship. It's, that feeling that you get when you leave a worship set and you don't even know why, but you feel better.
Yeah.
It's like you can't even explain it, but it's just things get fixed. And it's because a moment in God's presence can fix what medication and doctors can take years to fix. And I think that there's something that happens in God's presence where it's suddenly, firstly for our minds, we forget about ourselves, so we remember who He is. We get reminded of God's goodness and who He is, and then also it's just healing, like body, soul, mind, spirit. It just, worship heals us, so it's so, so important.
I love Michael Kilianos' quote where he said, true worship is when we completely forget about ourselves.
Yeah, the moment you forget about yourself, that's true worship.
And you focus on Him. And I remember when Jesus is walking down the road and the people are praising, like calling out to Him. And the Pharisees say, why don't you tell these people to shut up? And He says, I'll tell you the truth. If they keep quiet, the rocks themselves will begin to praise Me.
Sure.
Because God, He is worthy of worship and His very existence demands worship. And so we've never more truly aligned ourselves with Him than when we're worshiping Him, because the very fact that He's alive demands worship. And Paul says all of creation declares His handiwork, and actually humanity has no excuse for not knowing God's real, because if you look at creation, it declares the glory of God.
Yeah.
And so when we worship God, we're aligning ourselves with that glory, and we're giving to Him what is due. And we there's no better position for us to be as humans than lining ourselves up with all of creation and declaring the glory of God.
Yeah.
Just one quick thing to add on that. One of the first ways that I heard worship explained, I think when it started to be unpacked in my mind and understanding what actually happens, was something that Jonathan David Helser said when he said worship is giving back to God what He first gave you. And it's a thing of you were created, He breathed His life into you, and worship is you giving that breath back to Him. And that's what creation does. Someone also said, if you don't worship, don't worry, creation will worship for you. The rocks are going to cry out.
Yeah.
If you don't, all of creation will. And I think, it's our response to Him.
I think the most interesting one I've heard is it's like a back that is out of line, and coming into worship is like going to a chiropractor and getting it back straight into line. It all just fits in perfect place. And so it's the most interesting version of it that I've heard. But we also just want to ask you, what has your journey been with worship?
Yeah. Well, I think most of you will know. So I'm on the worship team. I lead worship, and I think a lot of people can see that, and that's kind of what they see as worship. But to me, worship is my quiet time. Worship is the place where I connect with the Lord, off stage and on stage. And I think the only way I can really explain worship in my life is, at my core, I think I am pure adoration. Like I'm full of awe and full of wonder, and I think I'll explain it like my heart is like a child. And I think when I look at creation, I mean, if rainbows would just stay in the sky for an hour, I'd probably stare at them for an hour. Like there's just this adoration in my heart, and I think that's worship in me. I think God, I'm made to worship, and I know that when I stand in His presence, when I stand in worship, I know I'm fully myself, I'm fully expressed, I'm fully alive. And it's because of that I know, I was made for that. So for me, a lot of the time growing up, worship looked like going for walks, really long walks. I grew up on a farm, so I had the ability to do that, and I love being in nature. I love it. I think that's definitely how I express worship. I think different people feel God's presence in different ways. And I think, it's definitely different for people. But I think when I feel delight, when I feel like I'm having fun, it's all things that I think that, I feel God's presence. And I think that's all worship. I think it's all inclusive.
So here's the question we want to ask you, that you can ask the rest of your groups, is, can you tell your group about a moment you felt that worship really impacted you?
Yeah.
Ben, what's the moment that's really impacted you in worship?
Gosh, I've had so many moments. I think the most recent moments have been the ones where I've just been aware of just how weak I feel, how broken I feel, how inadequate I feel. And then the presence of God will come rest on me, and suddenly that stuff won't matter, and I won't care about those anymore. And I know in this last season, I've been feeling really weak, and His strength has changed me. But throughout my life, Jesus just come and worship.
Wasn't there one time where you fell asleep in worship? Was that in worship? There's one time where Ben was feeling horrid. He's like, I don't even know. You know that moment where you're like, I don't know what's going on in my heart. I feel all these things. And Ben was like, okay, I'm just going to lie down. And I'm pretty sure he fell asleep, and he said he woke up I don't know how long later, and he felt like a new man.
Yeah, I was completely different.
Changed.
It's like
so
God
crazy.
had done heart surgery on me while I slept. I love sleeping in worship. It's good.
Sure.
Yeah, just switches your brain off.
That reminds me of the story of Elijah when he was in a bit of a weird space himself, where God literally told him to go eat something
and take a nap.
And
then he woke up from the nap, God fed him again, and then he was like, I'm going to go.
Yes.
Guys, that is my life. Yesterday I was on the floor in a puddle, and Ben's like, you need to eat food. It's real, real, real.
So here's the question. Can you tell your group about a moment that worship impacted you, changed you, and go for it?
So there's this interesting question that's always going around that a lot of people are probably asking themselves now, hearing that you're a worship leader and that you're singing, and that worship is this thing where we sing. And so I think the question we're going to ask you is there multiple forms of worship, or is it just limited to singing?
It's a great question.
You can't worship unless you can sing.
So then you can't worship, Ben?
I can't worship, yeah. I'm stunted.
I was literally about to say my husband is Exhibit A.
That's so rude.
Debunk that theory.
I'm mad at you.
Benj is probably, he's so tone deaf. Love you, Benj. But I know that Ben is, it's crazy. Ben cannot sing, but he's one of the most passionate worshippers I've ever met. So it has nothing to do with singing. I think something beautiful about voices. It's really amazing. But I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. It's not just up to singing. It's not left to worship leaders. Please, we need everyone to worship. I mean, if we were made to worship. I think I would just say to anyone, if you're not really sure how you express worship, find the thing that you love. Because if we believe that God created you, if He's inside of you, if you were made to give Him glory, then find the thing that you love, and that thing will bring Him glory and bring Him worship. And find out what makes your heart come alive. I think that more often than not, you will experience yourself actually worshiping, giving Him glory in that space, because you were made to do that. Yeah. So,
I love the story of Eric Liddell. He was a missionary to China. There was a really good runner, and he came back, and he was chosen for the Oxford team to go to the Olympics. And his sister came to him and said, "How can you give up what's so important, our work in China, to go run?" And Eric said, I cannot explain it, but when I run, I feel the pleasure of God.
Oh,
Sure.
so
And
good.
he knew he was born to run, and when he ran, it was like he did it as an act of worship.
Yeah, and I know for me, like I love business, and so like anything I do with business, like it makes me come alive, like building structures and like sorting stuff out and doing admin, like it really makes me come alive, and so I know that I can offer that as an act of worship to God.
Yeah, Paul literally says, like anything you do as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
So here's the question for you guys. How do you express worship to God in your groups? Like, I want you to discuss, like, what ways do you find you come alive and you express worship to God?
Do you guys know what time it is?
Do you know what time it is, Abby?
I've heard of this thing. I don't know what time it is. What time is it?
Wah, 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 wah.
It's the big question segment time.
Here we go. Let's go. Big questions, your questions, my questions, our questions, big questions. Yeah, yeah. Big questions. Yeah.
He's feeling himself on this. And this week's big question is, how do I logically know that God is real and that I can trust him?
Go, babe.
Logically.
It's all you.
Person says the word logic, and I'm like, ask Ben. Ben is logic.
Ben is logic. Logic incarnate is Ben.
Ben is all logic. How do I logically know that God is real? Is that the question?
What's your first instinct when you
My
hear the question?
instinct is turn your brain off and experience Jesus. I think, honestly, there are logical answers to this question. There is science, there is fact, and I think that I'm not the person to ask those questions. Ben really is the one, but God shows himself differently to everyone. So you need to. I think the Bible says, "Ask and you'll receive, and seek out and you will find." So I think you need to experience him. And how do I logically know God is real? Turn your brain off and worship and see what happens and see if he comes.
The craziest thing is that some of the top theological professors in the world are atheists. Some of the top
Really?
people that teach about theology, God,
How
are
can you
atheists.
be a theologian and be an atheist?
Exactly. We would all think that's crazy, but to them it's completely rational because they've turned God into an academic study. And you can academically study something without ever knowing it. For example, there's a 9-year-old person that's a fully qualified doctor. It's a 9-year-old boy. He's a fully qualified doctor. He has passed every qualification, but the question is, would you let them operate on you? Most of us would be like, no, they're 9. So they have all the academic qualifications, but there's something that you're not sure about. And so here's the point, that you can academically know everything, but unless you've experienced, tasted, and seen, you don't know.
And here's the thing, God will show up to you how your brain works. He'll show up to you how you need to hear him, how you experience him. Like, for example, if you know Debbie and Hugh Glover, God shows up to Hugh in a very different way than Debbie. Debbie is way more emotion. Hugh is all logic, and he's a maths professor. So the Lord
God
shows
gives
up
them math equations in worship. He just sees them.
literally. It's crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah. So the Lord will speak to you how you work.
But here's what I do want to say is the whole of Christianity is founded on the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Here's what we know about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Independent Christian sources all declare that Jesus was risen from the dead. But now we have sources that are not Christian. They're Jewish and Roman sources that say there was a man called Jesus who died, his body disappeared, and multiple people declared that they had seen him alive.
Yeah.
So we have sources who it's in their favor to say Jesus never rose from the dead, who say Jesus rose from the dead.
because of proof.
Yeah. So when you've got someone who's unbiased saying something, you want to believe it. Then we know that Jesus had 11 followers that all believed he rose from the dead, and all of them died for that belief. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever studied cults, but anything about cults is you always find people that suddenly freak out and no longer follow it. But for some reason, every one of his followers was willing to die for the belief.
Yeah.
And like, you have to believe with 11 people, if it wasn't real and they'd all got together and they're like, guys, let's make up the story,
Wow.
one of them would have recanted just before they crucified him or burnt him at a stake. But every single one of them died for that belief. And then lastly, we have seen this belief survive millennia and centuries, and we have seen this belief transform people's lives. And if you take all of that together, it is more rational and logical to believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead than it is to believe that it's a made-up story. And so actually the most logical, rational thing you can do is put your faith and trust in Jesus, because it's proven by historical fact, it's proven by record, and the fact that people have changed their lives according to it. And so it's literally the most rational thing you can do.
Yeah, it was Bono that said that either like this is the most insane thing that ever exists, or it's the most important thing of that has ever existed in our entirety of life. And he refuses to believe that it's something that would make us go insane. And so yeah, I think it's just really important that we acknowledge that that's something we can trust in.
Just one last thing. I remember someone said to me, hey, because I mean, okay, I grew up in a Christian home. I've heard about God all my life. And they were like, hey, if God is real, like, wouldn't you want to know? So it's like, if you're choosing to do this, if you're choosing to follow God, surely you'd want to know if he is real. So I really want to encourage you guys, like, this is a great question. Encourage you to talk to your leaders and actually find out for yourself. You have to be convinced 100% that you're not just following a Christian wave, a Christian river, that you actually know that God is real and that you've chosen to give him your life.
Yeah, don't just go along with the crowd.
Please don't.
Because
Please.
Christians throughout centuries have stood against the crowd. And when everyone else is doing this thing, Christians are the ones that say, I don't care what you say, I'm following Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
Well, we hope this week has been helpful for you guys, and it's been amazing to have you here, Ab. It's always
Thanks,
such a
Jade.
blessing, and Ben, it's always good to see your beautiful face.
The Connect Podcast.
Hey.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys soon.
Connect Podcast, yeah. Connect Podcast, yeah. Take it back now, y'all. Connect Podcast, yeah. Who says I can't sing?